become in a manner equals, and when I saw his old dim eyes wet with sympathizing tears, his grey hair thinly scattered on an age-wrinkled brow, I thought, oh, if my father were as he is, decrepit and hoary, then I should be spared this pain. When I had arrived at the nearest town, I took post horses, and followed the road my father had taken. At every inn where we changed horses we heard of him, and I was possessed by alternate hope and fear. At length I found that he had altered his route. At first he had followed the London road, but now he changed it, and upon inquiry I found that the one which he now pursued led towards the sea. My dream recurred to my thoughts. I was not usually superstitious, but in wretchedness every one is so. The sea was 50 miles off, yet it was towards it that he fled. The idea was terrible to my half-crazed imagination, and almost overturned the little self-possession that still remained to me. I journeyed all day. Every moment my misery increased, and the fever of my blood became intolerable. The summer sun shone in an unclouded sky. The air was close, but all was cool to me except my own scorching skin. Towards evening dark thunderclouds arose above the horizon, and I heard its distant roll. After sunset they darkened the whole sky, and it began to rain. The lightning lighted up the whole country, and the thunder drowned the noise of our carriage. At the next inn my father had not taken horses. He had left a box there, saying he would return, and had walked over the fields to the town of a sea-coast town 8 miles off. For a moment I was almost paralysed by fear, but my energy returned, and I demanded a guide to accompany me in following his steps. The night was tempestuous, but my bribe was high, and I easily procured a countryman. We passed through many lanes, and over fields and wild downs. The rain poured down in torrents, and the loud thunder broke in terrible crashes over our heads. Oh, what a night it was! And I passed on with quick steps among the high, dank grass, amid the rain and tempest. My dream was for ever in my thoughts, and with a kind of half-insanity that often possesses the mind in despair, I said, "Courage! We are not near the sea, we are yet several miles from the ocean." Yet it was towards the sea that our direction lay, and that heightened the confusion of my ideas. Once, overcome by fatigue, I sunk on the wet earth. About 200 yards distant, alone in a large meadow, stood a magnificent oak. The lightnings showed its myriad boughs torn by the storm. A strange idea seized me. A person must have felt all the agonies of doubt concerning the life and death of one who is the whole world to them, before they can enter into my feelings. For in that state the mind working unrestrained by the will makes strange and fanciful combinations with outward circumstances, and weaves the chances and changes of nature into an immediate connection with the event they dread. It was with this feeling that I turned to the old steward, who stood pale and trembling next to me. "Mark, Gaspar, if the next flash of lightning rend not that oak, my father will be alive." I had scarcely uttered these words than a flash instantly followed by a tremendous peal of thunder descended on it, and when my eyes recovered their sight after the dazzling light, the oak no longer stood in the meadow. The old man uttered a wild exclamation of horror when he saw so sudden an interpretation given to my prophecy. I started up, my strength returned. With my terror I cried, "O God, is this thy decree? Yet perhaps I shall not be too late." Although still several miles distant, we continued to approach the sea. We came at last to the road that led to the town of, and at an inn there we heard that my father had passed by somewhat before sunset. He had observed the approaching storm, and had hired a horse for the next town, which was situated a mile from the sea, that he might arrive there before it should commence. This town was 5 miles off. We hired a chaise here, and with 4 horses drove with speed through the storm. My garments were wet and clung around me, and my hair hung in straight locks on my neck when not blown aside by the wind. I shivered, yet my pulse was high with fever. Great God! What agony I endured! I shed no tears, but my eyes, wild and inflamed, were starting from my head. I could hardly support the weight that pressed upon my brain. We arrived at the town of in a little more than half an hour. When my father had arrived, the storm had already begun, but he had refused to stop, and leaving his horse there, he walked on towards the sea. Alas! It was double cruelty in him to have chosen the sea for his fatal resolve. It was adding madness to my despair. The poor servant who was with me endeavoured to persuade me to remain here and to let him go alone. I shook my head silently and sadly. Sick almost to death, I leant upon his arm, and as there was no road for a chaise, dragged my weary steps across the desolate downs to meet my fate, now too certain for the agony of doubt. Almost fainting, I slowly approached the fatal waters. When we had quitted the town we heard their roaring. I whispered to myself in a muttering voice, "The sound is the same as that which I heard in my dream. It is the knell of my father which I hear." The rain had ceased. There was no more thunder and lightning. The wind had paused. My heart no longer beat wildly. I did not feel any fever, but I was chilled. My knees sunk under me. I almost slept as I walked with excess of weariness. Every limb trembled. I was silent. All was silent, except the roaring of the sea, which became louder and more dreadful. Yet we advanced slowly. Sometimes I thought that we should never arrive, that the sound of waves would still allure us, and that we should walk on for ever and ever, field succeeding field. Never would our weary journey cease, nor night nor day, but still we should hear the dashing of the sea, and to all this there would be no end. Wild beyond the imagination of the happy are the thoughts bred by misery and despair. At length we reached the overhanging beach. A cottage stood beside the path. We knocked at the door, and it was opened. The bed within instantly caught my eye. Something stiff and straight lay on it, covered by a sheet. The cottagers looked aghast. The first words that they uttered confirmed what I before knew. I did not feel shocked or overcome. I believe that I asked 1 or 2 questions and listened to the answers. I hardly know, but in a few moments I sank lifeless to the ground, and so would that then all had been at an end. End of chapter 7.